Hi class, it's Bill Berry with a final bits of videos that go with our getting started with JavaScript. We are now coming into some places where we get to write some better HTML and some code in JavaScript that actually does something that feels a little more realistic and useful, so we're glad for that. So we are looking at forms. That's our topic for today. So let's jump down there and get started. So far we have communicated with the user in fairly rudimentary and crude, frankly, ways. We have prompted them for data and they have entered it, and that's great. But it's really kind of crude. If they had a lot of data to enter, this would be a little bit annoying. This is not the way we typically do things these days with a series of questions and the user can't correct things or go back or, whatever. We want to give them a little more flexibility. So HTML forms are the way to do that. And then we can piggyback onto that some cool JavaScript code that will let us manage those forms and do things like validation, which is make sure that the data they entered is the way it ought to be. So we're going to work on that. We will do the validation a little bit later, but for the moment we want to prove that we can create the form and then we can get access in JavaScript to all the data we entered there. So that's our topic for today. First of all, what is a form? Well, it's an organized way that you can have the user enter data. It is much more like what users are used to these days, which is you have a series of widgets, controls, a series of places where you can type stuff, choose stuff, whatever, and the user can jump back and forth until they're all satisfied with it, and then they can click a button that says submit or something like that, and it will go ahead and do whatever it needs to do next. So we're going to write that in HTML. Let's get started with that. Before we do that though, we have so far not really paid a lot of attention to what's going on in the HTML body section versus the HTML head section. And this time we're going to do a little bit different here. We're going to write our form in the body. That's where most HTML documents live, right? That's where most stuff happens in terms of what's being talked to, talking to the user, stuff like that. Most of that's going to go in the body section, and then we're going to add some code in JavaScript, but we're going to do that in the head section. So this is the first time that we're going to see something like that. So let's jump over and actually start some work here. I'm going to jump to my desktop. I'm going to copy my starter form and call it form demo. Oops, if I can get my hands in the right positions. Form demo. All right, so now I'm going to open that up in Notepad++. And the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to create both a body and a head section. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this entire body section, and then above the body section I'm going to change this one to a head section. And then of course I'm going to have a close head section. So both of these places are potentially places where we can put script. But as I said, very typically this part is not going to be a place for script. Very often we're going to put the script part up here and leave this part to be focused on HTML and the actual interactions with the user, the direct graphical user interface, or however you want to think of that. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Notice I'm going to save. I'm going to save continually just to make sure that I keep my work. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to design a form. So the way that we do that is going to be the following. We are going to start in the body with a form tag, right? So we're going to tab over because the form is part of the body. It is subordinate to the body. Now notice as I do, I'm going to always start and end my tags and then put things in the middle because then I won't forget anything. So that's kind of a good habit to get into. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we can certainly write some text in here, but before we do that, let's actually give the form a name. The way that these tags work, and we've seen this up here with the script tag, we can put attributes here. So one of the attributes I want to do for this form is to give it a name. This isn't a name that the user's going to see. This is a name that I'm going to use to refer to it, and I'm going to call it customer data. Remember that these attribute values are going to be put in double quotes, right, in quotation marks. So we say here, we are giving this form a name and it's called customer data. So now when we run this, as I said, the user's not going to see anything yet because we haven't done anything fun with the form. But the next thing that we can do, we can just type text, and if we type text, it's just going to show this text on the page. So let's just type some sort of basic kind of text like customer name, and then customer phone. Let's say this is a data entry for new customer data. Right. Now, if we only do this, and then let's say we put a break tag, remember we're in HTML, so we don't have to document.write and send these things out. So if we just start here, it's a good idea to make sure that you develop iteratively, that is, get one little thing working and then move on to the next. I'm going to hit run, launch in Firefox, and we're going to see customer name and phone. Well, that's not very exciting. We just wrote out some stuff, right? There's nothing very good happening so far. But here comes the fun part. After the customer name text, I'm going to make a special form entry, a form item, and that form element is going to be, in this case, it's going to look like this. I'm making a form input, and the type of input is going to be a text entry area, right? So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm making an input tag. That input tag is going to be an element on the form. The type of entry that I'm making is just a plain old area to put text. So I put the word text here. Now remember, we're writing in HTML. So in these cases, the names of things and the way that we, the way that we interact doesn't have to be cased very carefully. That's different than a script, but you'll want to be careful, certainly once we move into this area, we've got to be more careful about that. So I have an input box that is a text type box, and it's going to be right after customer name, and then I'm going to put a break after it because I want phone to be on the next line. I'm going to save that. I'm going to switch back over to my script. I'm going to hit F5 to my browser page, and lo and behold, now I can type a name. Right? So far there's nothing I can do with it, but it did make a text area, and I can certainly type, and I can keep typing, in fact, and it'll scroll, it'll let me select, it'll let me do all the things that you can normally do in a text box, and all you have to do to make that is just say type equals text on your input. I'm going to do the same thing here. Input type equals text, and then I close my angle bracket. Now notice you need to make sure your tags are even. That's one of the things that you can do very typically and do it wrong. Make sure that you have the tags that are open and closed in the right spots. So we open the input tag, we close the input tag, we open the break tag, we close the break tag. So now I have two boxes for typing text. If I go back here and I refresh, I can type the customer name, Joe Schmo, and the customer phones, 206-555-1212. Great. Great. So our form looks pretty cool. It might look cooler though. Let's say that maybe we want to have a heading that says, customer data. And maybe we want to make it a little bit prettier, like maybe a heading style, right? So in this case, I can make it a heading 1 style. Right, so heading 1 is going to be big and bold, and it's going to say customer data. And, the H1 tag will automatically force this to be on a separate line, I do believe. So let's go over and verify. There we go, big old customer data. If it looks too big and silly, make it a smaller heading style. Maybe H2 is going to be a little bit better. We're going to see. Yeah, maybe that's a little better. So we can make it pretty. This is just text that we're putting out there, but we're giving it a heading 2 style, which will make it big but not giant, as heading 1 would be. And then we have our text boxes. That's great. So everything's great, except we don't have a good way to actually move forward. We don't have any way for them to say, I'm done, right? I'm done entering things. So this is going to be our next thing, is we're going to put another input, but this time the type is going to be a button. Right? So the type is a button. It's not going to have any text next to it. In fact, maybe I'll tab it over since it's parallel to these. And then here's where I put what I want the text to be on the button. Like maybe I want a button that says submit. Okay. So this says not a text box, but this is a button, right? A clickable button. And on that button, I want it to say submit. So if I run that now, I'll switch back over and just refresh. Notice that now I have a lovely submit button there. And I can come and type stuff if I'd like, and then I can click the submit button. And you'll see it depresses and it acts like a button. Now, nothing's happening yet because we haven't said to do anything yet, but at least we know we have that working. The form is acting properly. It's doing all the things that we expect it to do, and that's fantastic. All right, so that's the first part of our form, is actually designing the form itself. Now, the next thing that we need to do And pause at this point if you want to stop and catch up and try this and play with it. There's a lot of other cool stuff you can do with forms, so we're going to stick with kind of basics right now. The next thing that we're going to want to do is to write some code, and then we're going to glue together the code that we write with this form so that when they click the submit button, something will happen in the script, and it can do something like make sure they haven't left things empty. So that's the next thing that we're going to do. This video is already over 10 minutes, so I think we'll stop here, and then I promise the next one will pick up at an interesting area where we're going to look at how to write code and then glue together, or glue together is a fine word, glue together the form with the actual code so that it does something cool for us. So thanks for watching so far. Pick up with the next video and we'll continue the idea.